Hi, this is Motels Dave, and I'm here to walk you through Walt Szymanski's 1991 Chrysler LeBaron GTC window sticker. And this was a sporty little car if you got it with a turbo engine, as he did, as every GTC buyer did in fact, and it cost $50,595 back in the day, which today would be about $36,000, and that's just for the LeBaron convertible itself. That's not for the GTC. The GTC option added the 2.5-liter turbo engine. And this was a great little engine because the 2.5-liter, it was a stroked version of the 2.2, so it generated good low-end torque, but it kind of ran out once you got past about 4,000 RPM if you had the standard TBI version. That's a single fuel injector. With the turbo, it had 4 fuel injectors, but more importantly, the turbo would start spinning up at about the time that the engine's natural torque stopped being as much of a factor, so what you ended up with was a very smooth package. It came with a 5-speed manual transmission. I think it was from Getrag, but I might be wrong about that. Chrysler also made manual transmissions. The GTC also had the sport bucket seats as opposed to regular bucket seats. It had high-performance 4-wheel disc brakes. 4-wheel disc brakes were still not universal at that point. A lot of cars still had rear drums. More performance-oriented suspension, 16-inch cast aluminum wheels with wide tires, and a very low profile for the time, a 55 profile. That all cost another $1,161, which today would be about $2,700, but well worth it, because this car with the 2.5-liter TBI engine would not be nearly as much fun, and with the automatic transmission would really not be as much fun. This was, by the way, one of Chrysler's most popular cars at the time it was made. It was beautifully styled. It is still an attractive car. It hasn't aged in its styling. Dodge didn't have the same car, which also helped. What did you get with it? That's where we go to the standard equipment area. This particular car, in the vehicle description, it talks about the 12-way power seat. That's a GTC feature. And you get the recliner, lumbar. Back wings were basically the parts that stick out on either side of your back to hold you in better. And that was handy for a car that had a better handling package. So these were all front-wheel drive cars. They had a single driver's side airbag, rear seat shoulder harnesses. That was, I believe, federally regulated at that point and required, as was a driver's side airbag. Or, depending if I'm getting the year right, then you could have also had a automatic seatbelt, which was a bit of a pain. They had 5-mile-per-hour front and rear bumpers, 2.5-liter turbocharged engine. I am pronouncing it that way because that's how it's spelled. SOHC is single overhead cam. It's an overhead cam design. Generally, overhead cam designs are seen as being more efficient than the old push rods. Usually that's true. Dual cam is generally seen as more efficient than a single cam, but more expensive. SMPI, sequential multiple port injection. So that's electronic fuel injection. Sequential means that the fuel injectors don't all fire at once. Every time one cylinder fires, all the injectors fire. So that's the sequential. They fire when they're needed. Multiple port means that there is one injector at each cylinder's port rather than the TBI injection, which is throttle body injection, where you basically just take your carburetor, throw it out, and shove in a fuel injector there. Aluminized steel exhaust system that really worked. This is one of the first cars where when you drove it around for years and years, you wouldn't have to replace the tailpipe and muffler every 5 to 6 years. Rear window defroster, that's kind of obvious. In those days, they had already switched to all electric, just like a car that you buy today. GTC package came with the power windows and power heated outside mirrors and the power door locks. They were automatic, so once you passed a certain speed, they would lock. And you could shut these off by performing some magic that was described in the owner's manual. They didn't have the digital systems that they have today for setting these preferences, so it would be something like turn the key twice, turn the power locks up, down, spin around 2 times, put your right leg up, put your right leg down, put your left leg up. Now you're doing the hokey pokey. Electronic speed control is cruise control. Tilt wheels, still not a universal option. The old joke is that somebody asked Mercedes why they didn't have tilt wheel when cheaper cars did, and the Mercedes person said, because we have the steering wheel in the right position already. Let's see, AM, FM stereo, electronic radio and clock, high-performance wipers. I think that meant that they had little airfoils on them so that when you're going at high speed, they would press harder onto the glass. Air conditioning, tinted glass, then still often optional. I'm pretty sure that's a GTC thing too. Here's the Power Enthusiast driver's seat. We covered that. 60-40 split fold-down rear seat was nice because you could still have two people in the back seat with their own seat belts while having a pass-through for skis or whatever else. Premium sound insulation because it's a Chrysler. There's the big tires for the era. They were quite big for the era, especially consider this is a four-cylinder car again. The light bar message center and chime warning system. Well, the chimes are obvious, but the light bar was they had a little picture of the car and lights would come up where there was some sort of trouble, like a door that was ajar. Illuminated entry so that when you open up the door, the dome light goes on. Full analog instrumentation means that you have a real gas gauge, real temperature gauge, and so forth. And finally, your little mirrors on the sun visors on the right and the left. When you look down on this, you can see the port of entry was Fenton, Missouri. That's because it was made in the St. Louis plant, which was in Fenton, Missouri. Now let's go to options. You have your overhead console. That told you the temperature outside and the direction that you were heading. That was $611. Probably worth it because we didn't have cell phones with navigation back then. Automatic transmission, about $900. That's about the price that it is on pretty much any car from that era. But, oh God, why would you do that on a beautiful turbo Chrysler? I mean, really, why would you do that? Because Chrysler was lousy at tuning their 3-speed automatics to match the turbo engines. And even if they hadn't been, it's such a smooth engine. Why restrict yourself with that 3-speed? It'll kill your gas mileage. And here we see that the gas mileage was 19 city, 24 highway, which wasn't terrible, and it was probably much better than a V6 version would have been, which you can find out by going to look at one of their V6 cars. But still, the automatic, it sapped the gas mileage, it sapped your power, and it made it much noisier at highway speed because it had no overdrive. The trip computer, that is your gas mileage calculation mostly, $215. And your Infinity sound system for $1,300 in modern money. That gave you a cassette player, 6 speakers, retracting antenna, and a little amplifier in every speaker so that you could really get the bass. That was one of Chrysler's very first high-fidelity sound systems, and it was quite good at what it did. So the total for this car was $18,000 or so, which today would be about $42,000 before destination and $100 that they give back to you for getting the GTC package. Don't ask me why they did it like that. So the destination charge would have been about $1,200 today, when Chrysler charges about $1,900 destination, so that's a bargain. And the absolute total price before negotiations with the dealer would have been about $42,600 in today's money. And you can say, it was a lot cheaper then. People must have had better times back then. But you have to also consider that people were being paid less than half as much as they are now. So these things are all relative. But it was still a very enjoyable car. It was a beautiful car to look at. It was a comfortable car. What's missing from a car of today? Mostly safety. No anti-lock brakes, you'll notice. No traction control. The safety standards were generally much lower, especially for side impact and rollover. But if you're concerned about safety, these would have been 1 or 2 star cars by today's standards. The gas mileage isn't great compared to one of today's cars, and that's because it has that 3-speed automatic. This car would have had a lot less sound insulation than a typical modern car because they didn't use acoustic glass yet. And you can lock in a child seat much more easily, but that I could do a whole video on, so I'm going to cut this short. It was a really enjoyable car. It was an expensive car for the time. It was a premium car, but then it was a Chrysler. So thank you, Walt, for sending this to me. I sent it many years ago, and thank you, Walt, for sending me the pictures of the car that you owned, which is on this price sticker. This is Dave signing out.